The entities are always different, the currencies are always different, but the dynamics are very much the same. And the one thing I can say to our viewers is that this is not over. There's been a little bit of a sigh of relief. Stock market rallied a little bit toward the end of beginning of April. And okay, that's a normal reaction. But any thought that the problem's been solved, the bailout's complete, you're not going to hear more, is just not true. The problem is each crisis tends to get bigger than the one before, which means each bailout gets bigger than the one before. My question that I'm wrestling with, are we now at the point where the needed bailout is bigger than the capacity of the central banks? The Silicon Valley Bank was taken over by the regulators on March 10th, but you can see it coming. It was in distress. There was $40 billion pulled out of that bank in one day on Thursday, March 9th, the day before it was taken over. $40 billion just, hit the road, just left. It was a complete collapse. 2 days later, they took over Signature Bank. So, well, we got two banks now. We got to, zero in on this. It was a crypto connection, a Signature. We'll talk more about that. And then the next day, First Republic hanging by a thread. It's still hanging by a thread. The Silicon Valley Bank in their loan agreement said, when we lend you this money, you have to put it in Silicon Valley Bank, and you may not put it in any other bank. I mean, one of the ways as a depositor, one of the ways you diversify risk is, take the money, put it in 5 banks, a little more paperwork, but if one of these banks goes down, I've still got the other 4, I'm good to go. But the borrowers had to put it all in Silicon Valley Bank. So everybody's locked in to this party. To hear Jenny Ellis say it's not a bailout. Are you kidding me? This is the biggest bailout in history. And I negotiated the LTCM bailout. I lived through that. That was $1 trillion of derivatives. But through 2008, 2020, the pandemic, I go back to 1994, the Mexican tequila crisis. I've lived through all these and been more or less directly involved in all of them. And this is orders of magnitude greater in terms of what's being bailed out. As the crisis gets worse, it's no longer, let's wait for the Fed to bail it out, or let's wait for the ECB to bail it out. You get to the point, I think we're there, where you say, no, these guys actually can't stop it. And you lose confidence in the currency itself. It's the dollar, the crisis is the dollar itself, and the euro, goes along with that. And then that's the crisis. And there's no way to bail out a dollar crisis with dollars, because you're just pumping more of what people have lost confidence in. And then, then where do you go? And there are good answers to that. We've seen it, again, we've seen it all before, but you have to kind of take the timeline out to, 1,000 years, or, the 1350s with the failure of the Bardi and Peruzzi banks in Florence, to see how these things can really play out. The Fed said, okay, all you banks, if you send us your bonds, we'll give you cash. Okay, that's just a normal discount operation. But we'll give you cash equivalent to the par value. So again, remember, the market value is like 80 cents on the dollar, but the Fed says we'll give you 100 cents on the dollar. So now you not only you ship your bonds to the Fed, they give you not 100%, which is like low collateral, but they give you 120%. So the banks are shipping in bonds that are worth 80 cents on the dollar. Hey, Fed, if you want to give me a low interest rate bridge loan with 80% down, I'll take all you got. I'm not going to pick a specific name, and we all know the names of the big banks that might be in distress. I'm just saying that there are more dominoes waiting to fall. The really interesting part about this, and again, we can come back to the specifics, is that the dominoes falling is a good metaphor. It's, if you got 100 dominoes, you knock the first one, they're all going to fall. That's just physics. So how do you stop that? How do you stop that crisis? Well, you truncate, you drop a steel wall between two dominoes, and this one hits the wall and this one's still standing. But that's the bailout. But the problem is each crisis tends to get bigger than the one before, which means each bailout gets bigger than the one before. My question that I'm wrestling with, are we now at the point where the needed bailout is bigger than the capacity of the central banks? So the shipping in billions, potentially $1 trillion or more of these bonds. They're not getting 80, 90 cents on the dollar, which is what they're worth. They're getting 100 cents on the dollar, which was the original purchase price. They don't have to take the loss, and they're getting cash. Why wouldn't you do that all day long? So in effect, not only did the FDIC do a 180 between Friday night and Sunday night, but they bailed out the entire banking system to the tune of trillions of dollars. They just blew up the $250,000 limit. Forget that. I mean, I know what the statute says, but they threw that out the window. And the moral hazard, the economic consequences, the repercussions of this are kind of unimaginable. Regulators, politicians, they mess up and they make mistakes, and it happens all over the world. But the British are really good at stepping up. They resign. You know, if you've done very badly, you're a minister or head of something, and just things go badly on your watch, even if it arguably wasn't from, they resign. They say, well, I'll just resign. And Japanese do too. And someone takes their place. In America, we act like nothing's wrong. Nobody resigns. Nobody takes responsibility. I mean, I would have said Jay Powell, Michael Barr, who's the vice chairman of the Federal Reserve for supervision. So he's the guy who wears the regulatory hat. Powell's the chairman. And Mary Daly, who's the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. Why haven't all three of them resigned or been fired? Jay Powell is probably sick. He's given 6 speeches, either post-FOMC meeting press conferences or like the Brookings Institution speech at the end of November, Jackson Hole, August 26th. He keeps saying the same thing. He says, inflation is job one, period. We're not really worried about anything other than inflation, and we're not going to rest until we get it down to 2%. And he said, we're going to have a recession. He didn't use the R word, but you don't need a decoder ring to figure that out. He said, unemployment is going to go up. And the Jackson Hole speech, he used the word pain like 5 times in one paragraph. I've been doing this for 45 years. I've never heard a Fed chairman use the word pain. He said, there's going to be a lot of pain. You're going to feel the pain. But the point is, he meant it. There's something called the terminal rate. What's the terminal rate? Well, no one knows the number. I don't know, because Jay Powell doesn't know. So we're all estimating. But the terminal rate is defined. It's a rate that's high enough to bring down inflation on its own without further rate hikes. We can stop here and confident that inflation is going to come down without doing more. Because the conundrum is, okay, they've been raising rates since March 2022. Monetary policy works with a lag. Inflation peaked in July 2022, and it has been coming down ever since. That's, some months were, February was a little hot January was hot compared to December, but the trend has been down. So, and they're raising rates and inflation is coming down. So that's good. But here's what they don't know. Was inflation coming down because they were raising rates?